And he said, okay, I'm buying my son who's going to NYU as a freshman an apartment. He needs to be able to walk to school. So I sent him some $1, $2, and $3 million apartments, and he sent me back an $8 million apartment. And I was so excited to go see this apartment.
Hello and welcome to Sprinkle. Today we're talking with Sydney Blumstein, who is a second-generation real estate agent working for a family dynasty that sits within the larger Corcoran Group, who are a famous firm working with luxury properties in New York. Sydney sees thousands of properties a year, absolutely loves the city, owns her own warehouse in Williamsburg, and has sold and rented over $400 million worth of property in her career. So she has plenty to say on the subject. Stories of her favourite properties, the biggest shocks and surprises, and what she sees for the future. And whether you're buying or selling, if you're in the market for anything luxury, whether it's private jets, a villa in Miami, or anything rare and special, head to sprinkle.com. You can browse our listings and start real conversations with verified buyers and sellers today. For now, on to our conversation with Sydney. It was clear to me very early on in our conversation that one of the reasons Sydney is so good at her job is that she absolutely loves everything to do with property, but also with New York. So I asked her how this love first began.
My joke is that I got into real estate by accident, but it feels very predetermined. My mom started her real estate business in 1991 when my parents switched which parent was the stay-at-home parent. So my dad, who had been working in fashion, started to stay at home with us. My mom got into real estate and was so successful so quickly that my dad actually joined her as her assistant. Now they're co-owners of our team, although everyone knows my mom is the boss. And when I went to college, I studied history and wanted to be a teacher. And I graduated from college and pursued a lot of different interests. And my parents asked me to get my real estate license and said that I could live in their 2,500 square foot apartment in Greenwich Village with them for free as long as I wanted. And I could throw parties and have my friends over as long as I got my real estate license. So got my real estate license, showed and sold one apartment and made $10,000 and was like, this is amazing. I will totally do this.
She then went off traveling before coming back to New York to dive into her new career.
Promptly booked a trip around the world, came back a year later during the Great Recession when Lehman Brothers crashed, and slowly began to diversify my business. So built out our team's rental arm, strongly considered my love of renovation and restoration of particularly pre-war spaces in New York City. When the market crashed in 2008. It was the end of an era of very rapid construction of glass and steel buildings and a movement back towards restoring pre-war townhouses in Brooklyn, artist lofts in Soho. Just the energy of the market was changing and truly aligned with my interests. So that's when my career really got going. I worked with a lot of friends to buy their first homes in emerging parts of the city like Bushwick, Brooklyn, Jackson Heights, Queens, Harlem, even Staten Island, because interest rates were below 1%. And I was spending most of my time on the phone with their parents saying, this is an incredible opportunity in New York City real estate history, sold and rented many homes, and built myself a career that I'm now in the 20th year of.
I asked Sydney why she thought her mum had been immediately so successful in the real estate business.
My mom, Maris Blumstein, is a really intoxicating character. She is a loft pioneer herself. Her and my dad purchased their loft in Greenwich Village in 1975 for $30,000. And she's very self-confident and an extremely good listener. And she's extremely talented at communicating things back to people that they've already said to her. So someone will say to her, I want to purchase a home. And she will say, oh, this is so exciting that we're on the brink of your first home purchase. Every morning I get a text from her that says, you are fantastic. Today is going to be a huge success. So I can only imagine how wonderful and refreshing she was at that time in real estate. She's obsessed with birthdays, with celebration. She has such vision and such creativity. And she presents unlike most women. You know, she has changed her hair color many times. She always has big, bright red nails, and she's a commanding presence. And on top of that, she's extremely smart and extremely passionate about New York City. She's a New York or nowhere kind of gal.
So Sydney also seemed inspired not only by property and renovation and helping people find their ideal home, but also the city itself. She clearly loves New York, and I was curious which parts of New York were her favorites.
My favorite parts of the city keep changing, I think because New York is such an undulating and evolving place. When I first started in real estate, I was obsessed with this area along the L train called the Morgan Avenue L stop because it had the nightclubs and nightlife that my young 20s self was obsessed with. And it was these enormous warehouse spaces, and it was just such an excess of space. And many of the buildings had street art, and a lot of the living accommodations felt like Soho when I was growing up in the 80s. It was very artsy, unique, young, and colorful. And then more recently, I've really enjoyed, now that I'm in my young 40s, I love going to Soho and seeing the iterations of that neighborhood, which was Bushwick many years ago in its essence, and how the people who are not traditionally renovating are reimagining these historical spaces. And I really love learning new parts of New York. I've lived there my whole life, but I infrequently find myself on a street I've never walked on, and I'm just blown away. And the privilege of pulling up my phone and saying, oh, Bayard Street, what's for sale in this building? And ooh, look at the history of this, a former carriage house. You can tell I'm obsessed with pre-war.
Having set the scene a little bit with how Sydney got into the business and what she loves about the city, I wanted to understand the nitty-gritty of the life cycle of a deal, how people come to her, why they come to her, and how long things take.
So people arrive at their introduction with a real estate broker with varying forms of urgency. There's a joke in real estate, it's not that funny, but that the reason we get our clients is birth, death, divorce, debt, or marriage, because those are really the big change moments in people's lives. And there's a famous real estate broker who used to go to hospitals when babies were born and say to the parents, like, you probably need an extra bedroom, and hand out business cards. I would say that most people come to me in this market with high interest rates and are curious. They're exploring. They're open to the possibilities, want to know what they can afford. And recently I made a video about how in New York City, the first step is always compromise, even for the ultra wealthy, because you may find the perfect apartment with views of Central Park, but some buildings have monthlies that are $10,000 a month, and some buildings have monthlies that are $50,000 a month. And there are so many different intricacies that we have to unpack and explore that really factor into the bottom line of what you're spending. So generally, it's an introductory phone call. It's a ton of education on my part, which is why I've leaned into video in this video era, trying to save people a bit of time, because otherwise it's an hour-long phone call to begin. And then what's unique about our team is we generally put preparation before shopping. So we make sure people have their ducks in a row, because New York City is unlike purchasing real estate anywhere else in the world. It's not casual. We have our own systems. We use real estate attorneys, which is unique. The real estate brokers don't draw up the contracts.
We then talked a little bit more about this nitty-gritty and how long it can take and the legal process. But first, Sydney's favourite part of her work, which is shopping for properties.
And then the best part is shopping for a home. The walking around, the seeing the spaces, the seeing the finishes, the views, the history, whatever we're encountering. And then we begin the true torture and meat of the deal, which is getting the fantasy to become the reality. So how do we get the offer to get accepted? How do we get the accepted offer through the due diligence period? How do we get contracts signed? And then we're in this whole sub journey. If they're financing, making sure the building is approved. If they're purchasing in a cooperative, which everybody knows about New York City co-ops and how challenging they are, making sure they get through the board. And then once that's all done, if they intend to renovate, Department of Buildings can slow things down. So I would say that for most people, from the introductory phone call to moving into their home is a minimum of 6 months. Once I had a deal that closed in 30 days, but that was a many millions of dollars transaction. And the buyer had to be in New York to film a movie for a year, and they were unwilling to live in a hotel for $1,000 a night.
Sydney mentioned earlier that New York is unlike anywhere else in the world if you're looking to buy property. I asked her why this was.
I would say what's really amazing about New York City real estate and interesting to me, because I'm a millennial. I remember the time before cell phones. I really see the importance of phone conversations in the era of text and email. I understand and recognize the imperative nature of broker-to-broker relationships, off-market conversations, and knowing that for a price, anything is possible in New York City, which is so cool. That's why everybody wants to go there. You can be in New York City at 2 a.m. and say, I want pizza, or I want to go roller skating, or I want to see a dance show, and it's all happening.
It's not just the culture, it's also the legal process that's different in New York.
In a lot of other cities, when you hire a real estate broker, the broker is responsible for the legal portion of the transaction as well. So the broker will draw up the contract, they'll be more involved in the due diligence. The big difference in New York City is that many of our buildings operate as corporations, either condominiums or co-ops, but they have annual financial reports. They have annual expenses. Sometimes there's something called an assessment, or they're putting up scaffolding and working on the facade of the building for a year. Our real estate attorneys here are flat fee, and they help our purchasers after they have an accepted offer to ensure what they're purchasing is actually what they intended to purchase. And there are a number of things that real estate brokers are not required to disclose in New York City. Things about leaks, noise complaints, rodents, things that would only appear in the building minutes. So things that we generally don't have access to until an offer has been accepted and due diligence period begins.
Stepping outside the world of New York just for a second, this is just a reminder that whether you're buying or selling, if you're in the market for luxury goods, whether it's a small aircraft or maybe even an apartment in Manhattan, then get yourself over to sprinkle.com, where you can browse our listings and start serious conversations with real verified sellers today. Anyway, back to our conversation with Sydney and a question I knew she would have a great answer to, which is, what is her favorite property she's ever worked on in New York?
My favorite property I've worked with is the property I own. I was tracking it for 3 years. I had seen it on the market overpriced by about $1 million. And it's a single story 1920s warehouse that was previously used as a plumbing supply store. And then 2 artists purchased it, and it has 15-foot ceilings. So they built a number of mezzanine bedrooms. And I saw it come on the market. I went to see it for myself. I knew it was overpriced. I bullied the broker about it. Fast forward 2 years, it had not sold. And I brought my husband and my brother there. And it was so amazing to open the door and see them both be as moved as I am. And 9 years later, it is so incredible to open the door to friends, or we rent it out for events, and watch people see all the parts of New York City they think have evaporated, exposed brick, beams on the ceiling, and not just beams, but 25-foot wooden pillars that were cut from enormous trees that no longer exist. And it's intoxicating. And one of the coolest sort of real estate brokerage components of it is about 2 years after we bought it, I was up on the roof looking in the backyard of the building that's behind us on the next street. And it was looking very dilapidated and sad. And I called my dad and said, what do you think's up with 224 Ainsley Street? And he said, give me an hour, and called me back. And he said, we're purchasing 224 Ainsley Street. So I need you to go over there and check out the inside of the building, which is so my father. He will never let a real estate opportunity go by. And I love that attitude. And it's really infused me with the confidence to say to my customers, when I see them walk into a place they can't afford or it doesn't exactly match their goals, I say, wait, let's see if we can make this happen before we give up on it.
At Sprinkle, we love stories, so I couldn't resist asking her for another one.
In terms of sort of like a luxury story, which is interesting, I was 28 and I'd been working in real estate for about 6 years. And I got a phone call from a buyer I had never met. You know, the internet was a bit different in 2011. And he just said, "Hi, how are you? What's been going on? How's the market? Is it a buyer's or a seller's market?" And it wasn't really clear which it was at that time to me. And I'm not sure I had the confidence yet to say what I felt because we were still digging out from the Great Recession. And he said, "Okay, I'm buying my son who's going to NYU as a freshman an apartment. He needs to be able to walk to school." So I sent him some $1, $2, and $3 million apartments, and he sent me back an $8 million apartment. And I was so excited to go see this apartment. I went to see it. Every video that I sent him is me like, "This is amazing. This is so cool. Your son is going to be the coolest. He's going to have so many friends. Can I come to these parties?" And the client flew in, purchased the apartment, son moved in. And when he graduated from college, he pulled me aside and was like, "Thank you so much. That was incredible." Just get to be along for the ride with people. I get to see couples move into an apartment and have a baby. I get to see my favorite warehouse in Clinton Hill, Brooklyn, which was so cool as an artist loft. I helped sell it, and my friend who owns it now made it even better and more elegant and more modern. Real estate is just amazing, making something out of something or out of nothing. And then it's a place where you can eat and sleep and entertain. And then you also get the human friendships and connections, and there's money involved. It's just the coolest. It's just a fascinating business. It has so many tenants, no pun intended.
So these are great properties and great stories, but I was curious if she had any stories of a deal that got away.
I grew up with this narrative. My parents bought their loft, which is right near Washington Square Park, like I was saying, in 1975. For $36,000. I would say now that apartment's probably worth about $4.5 million. And it's been 50 years. So anything that you wait long enough will appreciate, right? But the neighborhood got better and better. And they said that 3 years after they purchased their apartment, the apartment below them was available for $140,000. And they were like, "No, way too expensive." And recently that apartment sold for almost $4 million as well. So they have always said to me, if you go see something and it's incredible and you're not going to buy it, find the person to buy it and kind of don't rest until you do. So one of my big talents as a real estate broker is digging through I always want to say Rolodex, but that's not a thing anymore, my contacts, and see if there's someone I can sort of match make with a space. And the one that got away was actually a home I wanted to buy, which was the first. I'm obsessed with warehouses. And there was a warehouse in Bushwick, East Williamsburg at 1 Knickerbocker. And I was just the most blown away by it. I wanted to buy it. It was on the market for 1.4. I called like 27 different friends to try to go in on it, but it was sort of before the crowdfunding. And it didn't work out. And about 4 years later, it sold for 3.5. So, I mean, I keep mentioning the numbers because it's significant, but it's also the feeling of a space, which doesn't get talked about on the real estate TV shows, but is very aligned with my family and our hippie nature. Is how do you feel in here? We can work backwards to the money. There's always money. You can find money, but the feeling, do you feel like you want to wake up here every day for a while?
With all of our guests on Sprinkle, there's a question I'm always curious about: how much they actually enjoy the numbers and business and negotiation side of their job. Because some people are motivated by the subject matter and their love of aircraft or property or whatever it is, but others are really also driven by this numbers game. So where was Sydney with this?
I love a negotiation. The reason I just paused is I don't love the focus now on how much a broker is being paid. I don't love having to make my buyers agree to a fee for service before we go out. That's a new iteration, which doesn't feel great. And it can be very challenging when you sit down with a seller who's your friend and you say, Listen, it's very clear this home is worth 2.2 million. Here's the proof. I do this every day for 20 years and they say, thank you so much. I want 5 million. And then navigating those challenges and deciding whether or not your time is worth using on educating your customer to what is the real situation. But I do love a negotiation. Like, we have a property on the market right now. We just got an offer today. I always slow down, think about how I'm going to structure it, think about how I'm going to communicate it to my seller. And it's very exciting. It's thrilling. And it's unlike most other feelings I've felt, short of like making a half-court basket at the end of a basketball game, when you just each step of the process is so exciting. We have an accepted offer. We found the right place. The contract got signed. The closing was today. So it's a lot of celebration and enormous lows. I'm overselling it because it's early in the morning and I've had a couple cups of coffee. But it's also, I can tell that we're moving into a better market that's either going to be improved or completely fall off a cliff. And both of those are opportunistic. And I'm looking forward to just a shift from what we've been working within.
Still on the hunt for stories, I then asked probably my favorite question to ask my guests. Did she have any really surprising or unusual deals, whether it was the property or the person, situations where she just really didn't expect it?
I think I'm an unusual character, so I don't get surprised that much, maybe because I was raised in New York City in the 80s in a loft by cool parents. So I saw a lot of stuff. In my early days of showing rentals, I was really surprised how many keys to how many apartments I was gifted. You know, they would just be like, you're going to show these 6 apartments. Here are just like the keys to people's homes, which really wouldn't fly anymore. And how many crazy things I walked in on, like people having sex in the middle of the living room, people breaking up 20 pounds of weed into baggies, an apartment that was literally a room with a shower next to the sink in the kitchen that was $2,500 a month on the 7th floor of a 6-story building. One apartment I went into was clearly being run as a laundromat. They had like bags and bags and bags of other people's clothing, and they had installed like 6 washer dryers in this 2-bedroom apartment. So the rental chapter was really interesting.
More generally, the thing that Sydney finds most surprising about her work and the property industry in New York is the pretty old-fashioned way that other agents approach showing people around properties.
The thing that surprises me the most is some of the like old guard brokers in New York City are like fragile dinosaurs, and they show these apartments in this way that feels like it's from a book that was like distributed in the 50s. That's like, and this is a kitchen. This is a refrigerator. And so many of my clients in this era are impatient and move fast because of the scrolling era, and just they can look at a 4,000 square foot apartment in 20 minutes if they want to. I will say I see between like 5,000 and 7,000 spaces a year. So it can get very challenging to remember all of them. I will generally see between 6 and 8 apartments in a day with a customer. When I was looking for my own first apartment, I looked for 12 years. I just couldn't stop. I just kept thinking there was going to be something better around the next corner.
It was clear that Sydney was very perceptive about the industry and had her own unique perspective on New York property markets. So I was curious to ask her whether she spotted any trends and what she thought the future would bring for property and real estate in New York.
Something that keeps coming up, which I think is really interesting, is there's been a trend in the past sort of 10 years to return to homogeneous interior design. So white waterfall marble, grays, whites, and blacks, very clean design. And I feel the expectation has been that the individual will then fill it with their color, their art, their collections. But what I'm noticing is that it's making it harder to differentiate between different apartments. So in the last, I would say, year, 18 months, I'm starting to finally see some color get infused into design. And I also feel the era of enormous, super tall towers where you have to wait 20 minutes for an elevator or don't really get to know your neighbors is not as popular now. And I mean, you can see my home. I love color and I like when things are different. And I think for a long time, brokers were just telling clients, like, take all your stuff out of your space, paint it white, make it look like anyone's canvas. And now the mentality is, wow, it's so colorful and interesting in here. This is great. Let's do more design shots. We're starting to see a lot more like small design shots of like just this piece of the tile or like this portion of the wood. I think there's a bit more risk taking. And I think more significantly and sort of adjacent to real estate, the trend of real estate being online, of property videos, of shopping from the comfort of your own couch has a bit of a double-edged sword situation. So one, it's created an idea that the real estate broker is actually an actor and performer, and the spaces are their backdrop or their stage. And in many cases, I don't find that those homes are moving for the prices they could. That's just like a celebrity or high net worth pool, just sort of trading real estate playing cards rather than homes. And on the other turn of the coin, I feel like there are a lot of agents now working significantly harder to make a bigger impression and hold themselves to a higher standard. It's not really a business that you can call it in for anymore because people can Google review you or Yelp review you. And reputation will always be imperative.
So with this in mind, I asked what was probably a slightly selfishly motivated question. By now I started questioning my life choices and decisions around my career. Sydney's job just sounds amazing, and what a cool place to do it too. So I asked her whether she thought it was a good time or a bad time to become a real estate agent in New York.
I think it depends where you're living. I don't know for sure about other places. Sometimes I do referrals to other states and I get to meet some of the agents that we may be referring to, which is very useful to me. I get a sense of their marketing techniques. I will say there are still a lot of uninnovative people in real estate who think you just take photos and do a floor plan and put the listing up and cross your fingers. And those are the people who generally get fired and replaced. But if you like to watch Emily in Paris and you like to get creative and innovate and use a space in a unique way, and also if you like to open doors and say like, hi, welcome home, then real estate is probably for you. But it's a lot of plate spinning and balancing different energies. And I will say some days I find myself waking up very stressed because of something completely outside of my control, but I'm emotionally holding my customer, or elated because I made a deal, but unable to sit in that joy because I have another customer who needs me more urgently. So the historical mantra with real estate is you need to be able to carry all your bills for at least 6 months to a year without making a dollar. Before you get into real estate, you need to really work on your network because your network is your net worth. And you really have to be comfortable doing what we're doing right now, which is talking to strangers, selling yourself, explaining things clearly, speaking with confidence, and being a trusted advisor and co-decision maker. Real estate is a lot about decision making, decision fatigue, and risk tolerance. So you need somebody alongside with you who can help you go down that road and feel good about it.
And so I was curious, this sounded like it was probably the hardest part of her job, right? The emotional battle with the winning and losing, closing deals, not closing deals.
I think the hardest thing about my job is letting it go at the end of the day. I often dream about my clients, about my transactions, about things that are outside of my control, and remembering to not come home and sell my husband on things like what we're having for dinner. So I'll be like, well, we haven't had Thai in a week because we had Italian 2 times. And he's like, if you want Thai, we can have Thai. You don't need to make a case for Thai. And I think also holding people's disappointments or frustrations when things don't go the right way, when they have a home that got away. I was with a client yesterday and I spent like 7 months trying to convince him to buy something it was so clear he wanted. And when I saw him yesterday, so this was already about 2 years ago, he was like, why didn't I listen to you? And instead of digging in on that, I just said, how can I communicate with you better next time this happens? Not my fault, but I'm a Jewish mom, so I'm going to hold it and stress about it as much as possible and write in my journal about it. But yeah, letting things go, remembering that I'm not completely in control, and also riding the waves of a changing industry in a multi-generational business with boomer parents, millennial coworkers, and my assistant is Gen Z and moves a lot faster than me. But it's an imperative business. They keep trying to get rid of us, and we keep showing our value.
I like to finish off our Sprinkle conversations with a little fun question. So I asked Sydney rather cheekily, if it weren't New York, where would she live in the world?
New York or nowhere, babe. No, I'm just kidding. I would love to live in a hacienda on a beach in Mexico with joy. But I'm so lucky to work in a business that is generally not respected. I once heard it's stockbrokers, real estate brokers, used car salesmen, and the most respected business is firemen. And because of what my parents spent 30 years building, I get the golden doorway. Every time I come in, people expect that they're dealing with a good agent. My customers get more preferential scheduling, and it's forced me to be a better version of myself in business, which I'm really grateful for. I got to travel the world in my young 20s because of that first deal and see so many different places. And I fell in love with Sydney, Australia, and I love every single thing about Mexico. I would live anywhere in Mexico. But my husband is a native New Yorker and I'm a native New Yorker. And even though that means something different now, the independence infused in us, the ability to use our feet to move around, to experience different cultures without ever getting on an airplane, any culture of the world has an enclave in the 5 boroughs of New York City, it's an unrivaled privilege.
A huge thank you again to Sydney Blumstein for giving up her time to talk to us at Sprinkle. She sees something like 6,000 properties a year, so it was really great to sit down and chat with her and listen to all of her wisdom and stories. So just a final reminder that if you're in the market for luxury goods, whether you're buying or selling, make sure you head over to sprinkle.com and browse our listings. You can open up serious conversations with real verified buyers. And for now, thank you again for listening to this conversation with Sydney Blumstein on sprinkle.com.